I caught my brother and his pregnant wife in my bedroom when I came home from work. She was wearing a torn dress. I was shocked to find out that my brother wanted to beat her. I told, "Hey, Reddit. I really need to get something off my chest because it's been driving me absolutely nuts. So, I'm 30 years old, and I own a house in the city. Not just any house, it's a beautiful one, and honestly, it's my pride and joy. I worked my butt off to get it. The mortgage is no joke, around $4,500 a month, plus all the utilities, repairs, and random expenses that come with homeownership. Let's be real. I couldn't have pulled this off without years of relentless saving and a lucky break landing a solid tech job. I thought owning this house would feel like a huge win, you know? But instead, it's turned into a stress-filled nightmare that I never saw coming. Let me backtrack a little. My parents, Linda and Robert, are in their late 50s and early 60s. They're retired and were living their best lives in this cute little house out in the countryside. Picture the quintessential retirement dream. Small, peaceful, and surrounded by neighbors who moved at the same slow pace as they did. But then, about 6 months ago, they decided to sell their cozy little place and move to the city to be closer to me. At first, I thought it was sweet. My parents wanted to spend more time with their son and see what city life was all about. My mom even mentioned wanting access to better healthcare, and my dad joked that their tiny rural hospital wouldn't cut it if they caught urban diseases, whatever that's supposed to mean. Here's the kicker. They offered to use the money from selling their house to help me pay off my mortgage. The deal? They'd move in, and we'd all live together under one roof, bonding as a family. Sounds great in theory, right? Spoiler alert, it's been anything but. The first warning sign came before they even moved in. Their countryside house sold way faster than anyone expected, and they were over the moon. It's like fate. My mom gushed when she called to share the news. Within 2 weeks, they had packed up everything, and there I was, helping unload truckloads of their stuff into my house. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Boxes of random junk from their attic that hadn't been touched in decades, old Christmas decorations, broken kitchen gadgets, piles of photo albums, and stacks of magazines from the 90s. They insisted every last item was important, even though most of it clearly hadn't been looked at in years. My garage. It's now basically a storage unit. My once spacious living room. It's drowning in clutter. I tried to bite my tongue because, hey, they uprooted their lives to be closer to me, right? But the frustration started building fast. Things only went downhill from there. My parents have always been a little traditional, but now that we're living under the same roof, let's just say their quirks have become impossible to ignore. Living under the same roof really hammered home how different our lifestyles are. I'm someone who works long hours, and when I finally get home, all I want to do is relax, either with some Netflix or a few hours of gaming. My mom, though, she decided my house needed to run like hers used to. Suddenly, she was rearranging furniture without even asking, telling me I wasn't maximizing the space. One day, I came home to find she'd swapped out my sleek, modern dishware for her old floral china because, apparently, it's more homely. Every time I walked through the door, I felt like I'd stumbled into someone else's house. Then there was my dad. He claimed my backyard was too plain and took it upon himself to transform it into a vegetable garden. Without a word to me, he dug up the lawn and planted rows of tomatoes, carrots, and squash. When I confronted him, he just laughed and said, "You'll thank me when you're eating fresh veggies every day." Except, I barely cook. It felt like such an invasion of my space, but I kept quiet because I didn't want to cause drama. As if that wasn't enough, the financial situation didn't play out the way they promised. Remember how they said they'd help with my $4,500 mortgage? Yeah, that didn't happen. Turns out, the money from selling their house went toward paying off debts they never mentioned, and the rest? Locked away in a savings account. It's for emergencies, my mom told me when I asked. So now, I'm not just paying the mortgage, I'm also covering the utilities, groceries, and every other expense that comes with running a household. They offered to chip in, but it was always for the little stuff, like buying a few groceries or filling up my gas tank. Nothing that actually made a dent. On top of that, living together has brought out sides of my parents I didn't fully notice before. My mom, for instance, has mastered the art of guilt tripping. Anytime I try to set boundaries, like asking her to stop reorganizing my things, she'll sigh dramatically and say, "I guess I just don't know how to be helpful anymore." Or worse, maybe we shouldn't have moved here if we're such a burden. My dad, on the other hand, isn't as subtle. He started inviting his old friends over for marathon poker and beer sessions in my backyard. These hangouts always leave my fridge mysteriously empty, and my yard littered with beer cans and cigar butts. But the worst moment, that happened a couple of weeks ago. I came home from work to discover my mom had thrown out a bunch of my stuff, without asking. She claimed she was just tidying up, but her cleaning spree included some things I actually needed, like old paperwork and a jacket I'd left out. When I confronted her about throwing out my stuff, my mom immediately got defensive. "You never use those things anyway," she said, crossing her arms. "I'm just trying to help." What started as a simple question escalated into a full-blown argument. She accused me of being ungrateful, and I accused her of constantly overstepping. My dad tried to play peacemaker, but of course, he ended up siding with her. "She's just trying to make this place better for all of us," he said, as if that justified everything. I felt like I was losing control of my own home. The sanctuary I'd worked so hard for had turned into a battleground. I was constantly on edge, and the stress was taking a toll. Emotionally, financially, mentally, I was drained. But how do you bring something like this up without sounding like a selfish jerk? These are my parents, and I love them, but living like this is unbearable. I feel stuck. I want to assert my independence, to set boundaries, but I'm terrified of hurting their feelings or blowing up our family dynamic. If anyone has advice on how to handle this without completely destroying the relationship, I'm all ears. Right now, it feels like a no-win situation. And just when I thought things couldn't possibly get more chaotic, they did. One night, after another soul-crushing day at work, my mom called me into the living room. My dad was sitting on the couch, grinning like he was about to announce we'd won the lottery. My stomach sank instantly. "We have some wonderful news," my mom said, clasping her hands together like she was on a game show. "Your brother John and Sarah are coming to stay with us for a little while." I blinked, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. My older brother, John? The golden child who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes? He's 4 years older than me, effortlessly charming, and somehow manages to skate through life doing the bare minimum while still being showered with praise. And his wife, Sarah, who's 7 months pregnant. My mom loves bringing that up at every opportunity, as if it's the greatest thing ever. Hoping I'd misunderstood, I asked cautiously, "When, exactly?" "Tomorrow," my mom exclaimed, her voice bubbling with excitement like this was the best news in the world. "They're driving in tonight and should be here first thing in the morning." I just sat there stunned. Tomorrow. They hadn't even asked me, let alone given me any warning. My head started to pound as my mom launched into a speech about how we needed to make them feel welcome, how wonderful it would be to have a baby in the house soon, and how exciting this whole thing was going to be. Meanwhile, all I could think about was how stretched thin I already was. I'm paying for everything, every bill, every grocery run, every repair. And now 2 more mouths to feed. The thought of John moving in, especially since he eats like he's in training for a food competition, made me want to scream. The next morning, like clockwork, John and Sarah pulled up in a beat-up SUV that looked like it had been through a war. It was packed to the brim with their belongings. And I don't mean packed in a neat, organized way. I mean boxes tied to the roof, bags spilling out of the back seat, and, to top it all off, a crib strapped to the back like some kind of absurd cherry on top. The crib was strapped so precariously to the rear bumper, I half expected it to fall off as they pulled into the driveway. They parked like they were moving into a 5-bedroom mansion, and my parents rushed outside to greet them, acting like this was some kind of long-lost family reunion. "Brian," John called out, clapping me on the back as he strolled past me and into my house without so much as a pause. "Man, it's been ages. Hope you don't mind us crashing here for a bit." Crashing. That word. It sounded temporary, but I knew better. Sarah followed him, waddling under the weight of her pregnancy, her eyes darting around like she was appraising a fixer-upper. "Wow," she said, her voice oozing with fake admiration. "This place is so cozy." Guilt got the better of me, so I helped them unload their endless collection of boxes. One after another, we stacked them in the hallway, the spare bedroom, and even the living room. By the time we finished, my house looked like a moving truck had detonated in the middle of it. I asked, as casually as I could, "So, how long are you guys planning to stay?" John waved me off with a laugh. "Ah, Just until we get back on our feet. And there it was. My stomach dropped. Just until we get back on our feet is classic John speak for we're here indefinitely. The first week was a nightmare. John settled in as if he were staying at a 5-star resort, which is to say, he did absolutely nothing. Most of his time was spent parked on my couch, binging sports and clearing out my fridge. The snacks I'd bought for the week? Gone in days. One night, I came home from work to find him polishing off the last of my leftovers. When I pointed it out, he just shrugged and said, "What?" I was hungry, as if that explained everything. Sarah wasn't any better. She had this way of acting like her mere presence was a gift to the rest of us. Any time I tried to bring up a boundary, any boundary, she'd rest her hand dramatically on her pregnant belly and give me a look that practically screamed, "How dare you stress out a pregnant woman?" And the mess. Oh, the mess. Wherever Sarah went, chaos followed. Piles of dirty dishes in the sink, clothes draped over every piece of furniture, and the bathroom looked like it had been hit by a small hurricane. To top it off, my parents doted on them like they were royalty. My mom cooked elaborate meals every night, catering to Sarah's every pregnancy craving, while my dad hovered around John, offering to help with whatever projects he was working on. Spoiler alert, there were no projects. Meanwhile, I was stuck footing the bill for everything. Groceries, utilities, and even Sarah's never-ending supply of sparkling water and organic snacks. When I finally tried to bring it up to my parents, they brushed me off. "Family takes care of family," my mom said, like that somehow justified treating me like an open wallet. The tipping point came one night when I walked into the living room and found John hosting a full-blown poker game with his old college buddies. Beer bottles were scattered across the coffee table, greasy pizza boxes littered the floor, and the laughter was so loud it echoed through the entire house. The kicker. I had no idea they were coming over. "Relax, bro," John said with a smirk when I confronted him. "It's just a friendly game." That same night, I learned Sarah had invited her sister, Chloe, to stay for the weekend. Chloe didn't come alone. She brought her dog, a massive, untrained German shepherd that immediately started barking and tearing through the house like a tornado. Why didn't anyone bother asking me if this was okay? I asked, trying to keep my cool. Sarah just rolled her eyes. "It's only for a few days," she said dismissively, like that made it all fine. By this point, I felt like a guest in my own home. Every attempt I made to stand up for myself was met with guilt trips, excuses, or outright dismissals. My parents acted like I was being unreasonable, John strutted around like he owned the place, and Sarah wielded the fragile pregnant woman card at every possible opportunity. I started avoiding the house as much as I could, just to escape the chaos. But even that didn't last long. One morning, I came downstairs and found my entire kitchen had been completely rearranged. Sarah had decided that my system wasn't practical and took it upon herself to reorganize everything. My spices were now hidden in a drawer instead of the rack. My pots and pans were stacked precariously in the pantry. And my coffee maker? Banished to some forgotten corner of the counter. When I confronted her, she acted like I was the one being difficult. "I'm just trying to make things easier for everyone," she said with a shrug, as if that made it okay to steamroll my preferences. Then came the final straw. I got a call from my utility company. My bill had skyrocketed to nearly double its usual amount. Between the extra people in the house, the endless laundry, and John's habit of cranking the AC like we lived on the surface of the sun, my expenses were spiraling out of control. I decided I couldn't keep quiet any longer. I sat my parents down and tried to explain how unsustainable this was. My mom looked genuinely shocked. "But we're family," she said, as if that sentiment would magically pay the bills. My dad just nodded along, smiling like everything was fine. "You're doing great, son," he said, like that was supposed to fix anything. "I don't know how much more of this I can take. Every day feels like a battle, and I'm completely outnumbered. If I kick them out, I'll look like the worst person in the world, but staying silent is driving me insane. If anyone's been through something like this, I could really use some advice. Right now, I feel like I'm stuck in a never-ending nightmare. Between John freeloading and Sarah treating the house like her personal playground, I thought I'd hit my limit. And my parents, they just kept enabling John and Sarah at every turn. I didn't think there was much more they could throw at me, until Sarah dropped the bombshell. It all started during dinner one night. My mom had whipped up one of her famous casseroles, and everyone was sitting around the table, chatting like we were some picture-perfect sitcom family. Meanwhile, I was zoning out, trying to ignore the fact that I was bleeding money to keep this circus running. That's when Sarah casually leaned forward, smoothing her hand over her pregnant belly like it was a spotlight, and said, "Brian, we need to talk about the sleeping arrangements." I froze. "What about them?" I asked, already feeling a knot forming in my stomach. "Well," she began, her tone dripping with faux sweetness, "with the baby coming soon, we're going to need more space. The nursery isn't going to fit everything we need." "The nursery?" I asked, confused. "The guest room," she clarified, like it was obvious. "That's where we've been setting up the crib and baby stuff. But we've been thinking, and it's just not going to work. There's not enough room in there for the crib, the changing table, the bassinet, and all the storage for the baby's things." I glanced at John, hoping for some clarity, but he was just nodding along like she was presenting some genius idea. "Okay," I said cautiously, not sure where this was heading. "So," Sarah continued, her tone cheerful, like she wasn't about to completely overstep, "we were thinking it would make the most sense if we moved into your room." I almost choked on my drink. "My room?" I repeated, sure I'd misheard. "Yes, your room," she said, like it was the most logical thing in the world. "The baby needs a lot of space, and your room has the walk-in closet and the ensuite bathroom. It's perfect for us." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "You want me to give up my room?" I asked, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. "The master bedroom? The one I pay for? In the house I own?" Sarah frowned, like she hadn't expected any pushback. "Well, yes," she said matter-of-factly. "It's the best option for the baby." "And where exactly am I supposed to sleep?" I asked, already dreading her answer. "Oh, there's plenty of space," she said with a wave of her hand, as if she were being generous. "You could take the guest room, or even the couch. It's not like you need that much space. You're just one person." I felt my blood pressure spike. I turned to John, hoping he'd step in and stop this nonsense. Instead, he just shrugged and said, "She's got a point, man. The baby's going to need a lot of stuff. It's just practical." "Practical," I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "It's not practical to kick the owner of the house out of his own bedroom," I finished, my voice firm. Sarah's expression darkened. "It's not about kicking you out, Brian," she said, her tone heavy with frustration. "It's about doing what's best for the baby." "I thought you'd understand." That's when my mom chimed in. "Brian, maybe you should consider it," she said, her voice that irritating mix of gentle and patronizing. "It's just a room, and they'll need the space when the baby comes. It's a temporary sacrifice, for the sake of family." Temporary. Right. Just like their entire stay was supposed to be temporary. I turned to my dad, praying he'd back me up for once. But, as usual, he was conveniently preoccupied, shoveling food into his mouth and avoiding eye contact like it was his job. "No," I said firmly, my voice cutting through the room. "I'm not giving up my room. I pay the mortgage, I pay the bills, and I'm already letting all of you live here rent-free. My bedroom is not up for debate." The table fell into an awkward silence. Sarah looked genuinely offended, like I'd just insulted her unborn child. "Wow," she said after a moment, shaking her head. "I didn't realize you were so selfish." "Selfish?" I shot back, incredulous. "You're calling me selfish because I won't let you take over the one space in this house that's actually mine? Are you kidding me?" Sarah gasped, clutching her belly dramatically, as if my words had physically struck her. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant, Brian. Do you have any idea how stressful this is for me?" I clenched my fists under the table, willing myself to stay calm. "I'm not the one who decided to move in uninvited and demand my bedroom," I said through gritted teeth. "You've already taken over half the house. Enough is enough." That's when John finally decided to jump in, not to calm things down, of course, but to escalate them. "You don't have to be such a dick about it," he snapped, glaring at me. "We're family, man. Family helps each other out. Family also respects boundaries." I shot back, my voice sharp. "You've been here for weeks, eating my food, running up my bills, and contributing absolutely nothing. And now you think you're entitled to my bedroom? Unbelievable." My mom gasped, clutching her pearls, or maybe just her fork. "Brian, that's no way to talk to your brother." "No," I said, pushing back my chair and standing. "This conversation is over. I'm not giving up my room, and that's final." I stormed upstairs and slammed my bedroom door behind me, my heart pounding. I could hear their voices downstairs, hushed and conspiratorial, probably complaining about how unreasonable I was. I didn't care anymore. I'd had enough. The next day, Sarah doubled down. She started leaving baby catalogs and pamphlets about nursery setups scattered across the kitchen counter, like that would guilt me into caving. John, meanwhile, avoided me entirely, probably because he knew there was no chance I was going to budge. My mom, though, she kept dropping hints. "Pregnancy is so stressful," she'd say, her voice dripping with suggestion. "A little compromise would go such a long way." My dad tried to butter me up with a week, "It's just until the baby comes," but I wasn't having it. Every time Sarah brought up the idea, I shut her down immediately. When she ran to my parents to complain, I told them flat out I wasn't discussing it anymore. I even started locking my bedroom door when I wasn't home, just in case they got any bright ideas about moving in while I was at work. The tension in the house was unbearable. Sarah resorted to giving me the silent treatment, which, honestly, was a blessing. John sulked around like a teenager who'd had his Xbox taken away, and my parents acted like I was the villain in some tragic family drama for refusing to bow to their absurd demands. I started staying late at the office as much as possible just to escape the chaos. One night, though, I came home and found Sarah and my mom in my bedroom, measuring the walls. They had a tape measure stretched across one corner, and my mom was jotting notes into a notebook like they were on a home improvement show. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice echoing through the room. Sarah jumped, clutching her belly like I'd just thrown a grenade at her. My mom turned around, looking completely caught off guard. "We were just brainstorming," she said, her voice meek. "Get out." I pointed at the door, my patience long gone. Sarah let out an exaggerated huff and waddled past me, muttering under her breath about how unreasonable I was being. My mom trailed behind her, looking genuinely hurt, but I didn't care. I was done being polite. For a while, I thought we'd reached some sort of uneasy truce. Sure, the atmosphere in the house was tense, but I figured the Brian's master bedroom saga was over. I should have known better. One evening, I had to stay late at work, buried under a mountain of paperwork and endless meetings. By the time I finally got home, it was close to 9 p.m., and all I wanted was to collapse into bed and shut the world out for a few hours. As I pulled into the driveway, though, I noticed something strange. The lights in my bedroom were on. I was positive I'd turned them off before leaving that morning. The house was eerily quiet when I stepped inside. Normally, there was always noise, John yelling at the TV, Sarah clanging around in the kitchen, or my mom blasting her soap operas. But now, silence. A creeping sense of unease settled over me as I climbed the stairs. The moment I reached the top, I saw it. My bedroom door was wide open, and my belongings were scattered haphazardly in the hallway. Clothes, books, even my laptop, they were all either shoved into boxes or dumped carelessly on the floor. It looked like someone had looted the place. Frozen, I just stared at the mess for a second, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I heard Sarah's voice coming from inside my room. "This closet is perfect," she was saying, her tone chipper. "We'll put the baby's clothes here, and the shelves can hold all the extra." I stepped into the doorway and froze. Sarah was standing in my closet, already hanging up her maternity clothes. John, meanwhile, was lounging on my bed, scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice loud enough to make them both jump. Sarah spun around, her face an irritating mix of annoyance and fake innocence. "Oh, Brian. You're home," she said, like we were having a casual chat over coffee. "We're just getting settled in." "Settled in?" I repeated, barely able to keep my voice steady. "This is my room." John finally looked up from his phone, completely unfazed. "Mom said it was fine," he said with a shrug. "She agreed it makes sense for us to have this space." I stared at him, stunned. "Mom said it was fine," I repeated, trying to wrap my head around the audacity. "This is my house, my mortgage, my room. She doesn't get to make that decision." Sarah stepped out of the closet, her hands on her hips. "Brian, "We've been over this," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "The baby needs more space. It's not like you can't sleep somewhere else. This is what's best for everyone." "What's best for everyone?" I shot back, my blood boiling. "Or just what's best for you?" Sarah waved a hand dismissively, like I was the one being ridiculous. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a room. You can have it back when we move out." "And when exactly will that be?" I asked, glaring at John. "Because as far as I can tell, you have no intention of leaving." John rolled his eyes, looking like I'd just insulted him. "We're family, Brian. You're acting like we're strangers or something. It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal, and you know it," I snapped. Without waiting for a response, I turned and marched downstairs, fury bubbling over. My mom was sitting in the living room, watching one of her crime dramas like nothing was happening. "Mom," I said, my voice barely under control, "did you tell John and Sarah they could move into my room?" She looked up, blinking like she didn't understand why I was upset. "Well, I just thought it made sense," she said, her tone maddeningly calm. "Sarah's pregnant, and they need the space." "I need the space," I snapped, my voice rising. "It's my room, in my house. You had no right to tell them they could take it." Her expression shifted to the all-too-familiar look of maternal guilt tripping. "Brian, they're family," she said, her voice soft and patronizing. "Sarah's going through so much right now, and you're not even willing to make a small sacrifice to help her?" "Small sacrifice," I repeated, incredulous. My voice grew louder. "They've already taken over the entire house, Mom. They don't pay rent, they don't buy groceries, and now they're kicking me out of my own bedroom. How is that remotely fair?" "Life isn't always fair," she said, her tone so annoyingly calm it made me want to scream. "You're single, Brian. You don't need all that space. Sarah does. It's just common sense," she said, shaking her head like I was some stubborn child throwing a tantrum. I could feel the pressure building in my chest, ready to explode. "This isn't about fairness," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about boundaries. This is my house, and I've been more than generous letting all of you live here. But this crosses the line." She sighed, shaking her head like I was the one being unreasonable. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." That was it. I stormed back upstairs, my blood boiling. When I opened the door, Sarah was still in my closet, unpacking like nothing had happened. "Get out," I said, my voice low and cold. She turned, startled. "Excuse me." "Get out," I repeated, louder this time. "You're not staying in this room. Move your stuff back into the guest room, or I'll move it for you." Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms. "You're seriously going to make me do this?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're really going to throw a pregnant woman out of a room she needs for her baby?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Because it's not your room. It's mine." John got up from the bed, holding up his hands like he was the voice of reason. Hey, calm down," he said, trying to mediate. "There's no need to get hostile." "I'll get hostile if you don't start packing," I shot back, glaring at him. "You've been pushing me for weeks, and I'm done. Get out." For a moment, I thought he might dig in his heels and try to argue, but then he glanced at Sarah, who looked like she was about to cry. He sighed, muttering, "Fine. Whatever." They spent the next hour moving their things back into the guest room, slamming doors and muttering under their breath the entire time. I didn't care. I wasn't backing down. My parents stayed eerily silent, though I could feel my mom's disapproving glare from across the house. She didn't have to say anything. I knew exactly what she was thinking. When they were finally done, I locked my bedroom door and collapsed onto my bed, my heart still racing. I didn't care if they thought I was the bad guy. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. But I also knew this wasn't the end. After weeks of disrespect, crossed boundaries, and emotional manipulation, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. The chaos had turned my life into a nightmare, and the moment I saw Sarah hanging her clothes in my closet, I knew it was time to take drastic action. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I laid it all out: how my parents and brother had moved in uninvited, how they weren't contributing to expenses, and how they were now actively trying to take over my house. The lawyer listened sympathetically and then explained my options. He suggested issuing formal eviction notices. It wasn't a pleasant thought. I never wanted to be that guy. But it had become clear this was my last resort. I couldn't keep living like this, feeling like a stranger in my own home, walking on eggshells just to avoid the next crisis. So, I sat down and did the one thing I never thought I'd have to do. I wrote eviction notices. They were blunt, no room for argument. Everyone had 30 days to either leave or agree to new terms, respect my boundaries, contribute financially, and stop treating me like I was running a free Airbnb. It felt ruthless, but I was out of options. My lawyer assured me it was airtight, but the sense of relief I felt was quickly overtaken by dread. That night, I called everyone into the living room. My parents sat on the couch, looking completely oblivious, and John and Sarah were on the floor, Sarah rubbing her belly like she was trying to summon pity with every stroke. I stood there, gripping the eviction notices like a lifeline. "I need to talk to you all," I said, my voice firm, louder than I intended. "This situation has gotten out of control." They all looked up, the casual air in the room evaporating. "I've tried," I continued, "really tried, to be accommodating. But my boundaries have been crossed again and again. So, I've made a decision." I stepped forward and handed out the notices, one to my parents and one to John and Sarah. The room froze as they took them, and then Sarah's voice pierced the silence. "You're evicting us," she shrieked, holding the paper like it was on fire. "Brian, we have a baby on the way. Where are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," I said, my voice ice-cold. "You've been living here for free for weeks, eating my food, running up my bills, and ignoring every boundary I've set. Enough is enough." John snorted, crumpling his notice and throwing it on the floor. "This is a joke," he said, glaring at me. "We're family. Family doesn't kick each other out. And family doesn't treat each other like doormats," I shot back, stepping closer. "You've done nothing but freeload since you got here, John. If you don't want to be evicted, grow up and start pulling your weight." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't buying it. "We can't go out there with a baby," she said, her voice cracking. "What kind of person does this to their own family?" "The kind of person who's been pushed past his limit," I snapped, my fists clenched. "I've given you chance after chance to respect me and my home. Instead, you've treated me like a guest in my own house. This is your last chance, either change or leave." My mom's voice wavered as she spoke. "Brian, please," she said, her eyes wide and watery. "We're your parents. We raised you. You can't do this." "I'm not doing anything," I shot back, my voice rising. "You chose to move in here uninvited. You chose to ignore every boundary I set. And now, I'm choosing to take my life back." "You're single, Brian," my mom protested, her tone shifting to scolding. "You don't need all this space. Sarah does. Life isn't always fair." "No, it's not," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "But it's my house, and it's about time you started respecting that." The room went deadly silent. I could feel their fury, their disappointment, and their disbelief aimed squarely at me. But I didn't flinch. I couldn't. I was done being the nice guy. Done being the doormat. When they finally looked away, I walked upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and sat on my bed. My heart was pounding, but I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The next morning, I called my lawyer again and finalized the eviction process. This wasn't a fight anymore, it was survival. For the next few days, the tension in the house was unbearable. Sarah alternated between crying dramatically and giving me the cold shoulder, while John glared at me like I'd stabbed him in the back. My mom wouldn't let up with her guilt trips, constantly reminding me of all the sacrifices she and Dad had made for me growing up. My dad stayed mostly quiet, but I could tell from his expression that he thought I was overreacting. Then came the breaking point. John and Sarah had 48 hours left to move out, but they hadn't packed a single box. Not one. When I confronted John about it, he just shrugged. "We're not going anywhere," he said, leaning against the counter with that infuriating smirk. "What are you gonna do? Call the cops on your own brother?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "If you're not out by the deadline, I will call the police, and I will have you forcibly removed." John laughed, trying to brush it off like it was a joke, but I saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Sarah, on the other hand, looked outright panicked. "You wouldn't," she said. clutching her belly like it was some sort of shield. "You'd seriously do that to me? To your niece or nephew?" "Yes," I said again, my voice like steel. "You've left me no choice." The deadline came and went, and, true to form, they waited until the absolute last minute to start packing. I stayed upstairs, refusing to get dragged into yet another argument. I heard them shuffling around the house, slamming doors, muttering under their breath. Around midnight, I heard the rumble of their SUV starting in the driveway. I peeked out the window and saw it loaded to the brim with boxes and bags. They were finally gone. The next morning, the house felt eerily quiet. My parents were subdued, barely saying a word as they went about their day. My mom eventually approached me, her expression softer than it had been in weeks. "I'm sorry, Brian," she said, her voice low and hesitant. "I didn't realize how much this was affecting you. I should have stepped in sooner." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering frustration. "I don't want to lose my relationship with you and Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady, "but you have to understand, this is my house. I need my space, and I need my boundaries to be respected." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she nodded. "It won't happen again," she promised. The weeks that followed were strange. The house felt emptier without John and Sarah, but for the first time in months, it was peaceful. My parents started making an effort to contribute more. They'd clean without being asked, pay for groceries now and then, and even tried to be more respectful of my space. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As for John and Sarah, I heard through the grapevine that they were staying in a run-down motel on the outskirts of town, scrambling to figure out their next move. I didn't feel guilty. They made their choices, and now they were dealing with the consequences. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. My house was mine again. My life was mine again. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me ever again.